Country number 10, Madagascar. How did Madagascar get its shape? Well, that's an easy one. It's an island. It borders the sea. Alright, on to the next one. Huh? What's that? Fine, you get a real video. Madagascar is separated from Africa by the Mozambique Channel, 260 miles, 419 kilometers at its narrowest. The two used to be conjoined, part of an even larger continent called Gondwana, or Gondwana Land, along with South America, India, Australia, and Antarctica. We'll talk more about it in later videos. The Mozambique Channel opened up about 185 million years ago, the early Jurassic, dinosaur times, dividing Gondwana in half. Then, eastern Gondwana began splitting up in the early Cretaceous, sometime between 130 and 95 million years ago. Madagascar stayed with India until around 65 million years ago, when India made a beeline for Eurasia, just in time to say goodbye to the last of the non-avian dinosaurs. What was left is now the world's fourth largest island, excepting the continents. Just like mainland Africa, Madagascar was also uplifted by magmatic forces, creating a very dramatic topography. The central part of Madagascar is dominated by the Central Highlands, the north by the Tsaratanana Massif, while the west, east, and south coasts slope down from it. Madagascar's shape leads to a very diverse island. The westward trade winds crash directly against the eastern edge of the highlands, absolutely drenching the east coast year-round. This is the orographic effect, and consequently rainfall is blocked from continuing over the island. The rest of the island, therefore, gets to be at the mercy of the monsoon, a seasonal reversal of winds caused by the heating and cooling of the earth. While May to October bring dry air, November to April bring wet air, and the monsoon rains. They don't quite reach all the way to the south, which remains semi-arid year-round. Because of their elevation, the Central Highlands grade into a cooler subtropical and then temperate climate, where it gets chilly in winter, a bit like Zimbabwe. The east coast is dense evergreen rainforest and jungle. The northwest is deciduous dry forest, accented by coastal mangroves adapted to cope with the dry season. Southwestwards, the habitat grades first into woodlands of succulents, then to forests of thorny shrubs. The highlands are capped by subhumid forests. I've been focusing a lot on geography, but Madagascar is just so cool I can't pass up this opportunity. We've covered southern Africa, which has been inhabited by humans for about as long as there have been humans. But Madagascar is special. Humans have been bumbling on this earth for over 2 million years. Generation after generation, families were born, lived, and died. But through it all, during the untold lives of innumerable men lost to time, not a one set foot on Madagascar. Madagascar was one of the last major landmasses to be visited and settled by man. It's not quite certain when humans first ventured to her shores, but conclusive evidence suggests maybe as early as 2000 BC. What those first explorers would have found was a lost world. Madagascar's long isolation produced a diversity of life found nowhere else on Earth. Strange and wonderful plants like the baobab and traveler's trees, fish, amphibians, birds, mammals like the fossa, and lemurs like from the movie Madagascar. But before the coming of man, Madagascar possessed numerous species of giant lemurs, gorilla lemurs, sloth lemurs, dwarf hippopotamus, a giant fossa, and a race of elephant birds as tall as 2 men. To have been with those first explorers. Regardless of when humans first visited Madagascar, no such excursion seems to have lasted very long. Explorers and traders might have stopped for food and water, but kept on their merry way, possibly bringing tales of mythical beasts. I've seen the date anywhere from 500 BC to 500 AD, but by the Christian era, settlement was underway, the birth of a new Malagasy people. But have a look at this picture of one of the ethnic groups of Malagasy, the Merina. We've been in Africa for a while. Africans today can look any which way. But these people don't look much like the Bantu on the continent. Because the first Malagasy didn't come the 260 miles from Africa. No, they came the over 4,000 miles across the Indian Ocean. It seems impossible, but archaeological, linguistic, and genetic evidence all overwhelmingly indicate that a daring group of Indonesians braved the passage across the deep blue to discover and settle Madagascar. Now, you say. Fine. As incredible as that sounds, sure, they came from Indonesia. You might be thinking they came from one of the close islands like Sumatra or Java, but no. Their language is most similar to those spoken in Borneo, the far side of Borneo at that. These southeastern Borneans were the Barito, who survive today. They are part of a much larger group called the Austronesians, who are awesome. From humble origins in Taiwan, they colonized modern-day Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines, plus the wide highlands of the South Pacific. The peoples of Southeast Asia and Oceania descend from the most dramatic pre-modern migration of humans, along with our Malagasy. The Austronesians were a sophisticated folk. They grew crops like rice, taro, breadfruit, banana, coconut, and invented the most advanced pre-Renaissance sailing technology, allowing them to venture into open waters. These Austronesian pioneers didn't bring any livestock, but made do by hunting the large lemurs and birds on their new home. The first Malagasy are remembered as the Intaulwa, the first men. It is believed they called themselves the Vawaka, the canoe men. Starting on the east coast, they steadily moved inland, clearing land for farming. By the second millennium, they had penetrated into the highlands and soon became divided between Vezo, the coast men, who stayed close to shore as fishermen, and the Vazimba, the woodsmen, who ventured into the wilds. As time wore on, the population continued to grow, and more of Madagascar was tamed. With the trail blazed, others began to migrate to the island. From the 7th century, Arabs from Oman set up trade routes with the greater Indian Ocean network, settling in the northwest and southeast. They brought Islam and all the accoutrements of that civilization, like writing and architecture, mirroring the Swahili across the channel. Other Austronesians also joined their brethren on the island, as lords, merchants, and workers, sent by the seafaring kingdoms of Indonesia from the 8th century. They were known as the Hova. And third, and most important, Bantu arrived from the 9th century to feed demand for labor, workers, and slaves. But a lot of Bantu must have come to Madagascar, because they are the other major genetic component of the Malagasy. These varied peoples also thankfully brought livestock with them, as by now the native megafauna of Madagascar were dying out, stressed by overexploitation and habitat loss. Madagascar's melting pot of cultures began to resemble the diverse island they called home. Let's try to do this quickly. Along the coasts where Bantu predominated, they coalesced into the Sakalava of the southwestern woodlands, the Betsimi Saraka of the northeastern rainforests, the Antefasi of the southeastern rainforests, and the Antandroy of the southern thickets. The Zafi Romania, a Muslim people from either Arabia, Sumatra, or probably both, mingled in the southeast, diverging into three tribes, the Antambawaka of the Faraoni and the Bananjari rivers, the Antaimoro of the Sandronanta River, and the Antanosi between the Mananara and southern Manampanihi rivers. Under pressure from slavers along the coast, clans of Huva decided to flee inland. There they mingled with the Vazimba. One group settled along the swamps of Lake Alautra and Upper Bemarivo as the Sihinaka, but the majority settled the highlands north of the Mangoki Valley. These Huva remain the most visibly Austronesian. In 1540, a Sakalava leader, Andrea Bandazoala, founds the kingdom of Manabe, building its economy on exporting slaves. Those who didn't want to go along flee, some southwards into the thickets between the Manarandra and the Onilahi rivers as the Mahafali, some into the valleys and hills east as the Bara, or the Mangoki highlands as the Betsileo. 1545, Hova King Andrea Manelo subjugates the native Vazimba, beginning a heritage of conquest. Alright, we're not quite finished with the ethnogenesis of all the groups of Madagascar, but the island's filled out nicely. Despite all this diversity in ancestry and geography, these people constitute a common Malagasy people. Exactly what this name came from isn't known, but might be related to Malay, a term the first Intaulu would have brought with them to refer to their people, named after a river in Indonesia. Old Arabic maps refer to a Jazirat al-Malayu, the Malay island, written in Latin as Malay Gasira, eventually reduced to Malagasy. And these people speak a common language, or group of very similar languages, called Malagasy, which you've probably noticed has a fondness for really long names. Despite knowing about the island from travelers like Marco Polo, Europeans didn't encounter Madagascar until 1500, when Portuguese visited on their way to India. They called it São Lourenço, St. Lawrence. The modern name is thought to be related to the old Arabic name, repeated by Renaissance Europeans as Malagasy, morphing into Madagascar. It stuck. The native people adopted a foreign name for their home, probably because they couldn't agree on their own. With the coming of the Portuguese, Madagascar graduated from a point in the Indian Ocean trade to a role in the great world trade network that was developing. Southeast Africa traded two major goods in this time. Well, there are no elephants on Madagascar, so ivory was out. Instead, slaves became the big export, and Europeans found work for Malagasy slaves on the sugar, cotton, and tobacco plantations of Brazil, the Caribbean, and even North America. The growth of the slaving economy stimulated consolidation of power and wealth in Malagasy chiefs, and kingdoms emerged in the 17th century, and people continued to move around. And sadly, around this time, the last of the great elephant birds go extinct. By 1600, Zafi Raminia from the Antamoro travel into the highlands between the Manampatrana and Mananjeri and become the Tanala. 1612, Houva King Rulambu I calls his people Marina, the Highlanders, and his realm Imarina. 1614, Manabe Prince Kozobe leads a clan into the north, founding the kingdom of Antankarana, among the karst spires between the North Mahavavi and Manambatu rivers. 1635, the city of Antananarivo is founded as capital of Imarina, city of 1,000 soldiers. Control of sea lanes and stopover ports in the Indian Ocean were important to secure the spice trade from the Indies. Portugal already had Mozambique, so it wasn't too worried. Other Europeans, however, had little success settling Madagascar itself, but better results in the Mascarene Islands to the east. France founds Fort Dauphin among the Antinosi in 1643. Things must have gotten a little rocky when another Sakalava clan, the Antasaka, established themselves between the Bananara and Manambondro rivers not long after. Europeans trade guns in exchange for the slaves, and Manabe becomes the most formidable kingdom on the island, expanding north to the Betsiboka River. The French are squeezed by tropical diseases and hostile natives and abandon Fort Dauphin in 1674. Without a strong imperial presence, pirates find Madagascar a perfect base, securing peace with the native kings with guns and other acquired goods. There is even a legend of a pirate republic in the northeast called Libertalia, but more likely than not, this is just a myth. 1694, a succession crisis descends upon the Manabe when King Andrea Manetia Rivo's brother, Prince Andrea Mandi Soarivo, founds his own breakaway kingdom along Boina Bay, which pushes to the border of Antankarana. Vezo survive, however, as itinerant fishermen across the west coast. The Mahafali and Antinosi push into Antandroy territory, and Sakalava fleeing the slaving wars become the Tsimiheti, anarchists highly distrustful of authority. The remaining Vazimba in the Bangoro Valley become the Bazano-Zano. An eastern chief of Vetomandri, Remanano, forges a kingdom in 1710, soon beginning a campaign of conquest. By 1730, he unites the Betsimi Saraka, and pressure from him and Europeans and the Mascarenes ousts the last pirates from Madagascar. By 1750, Boina moves inland and conquers the Sihanaka, while the Tanala do the same to the Antamoro, but after a couple decades lose control. The real consolidation of the island comes from the Marina in the highlands. Imarina had suffered a period of civil war in the mid-18th century, but emerged vigorous and aggressive. King Andriam Puinimarina declared his ambition to rule the entire island. He managed to conquer the Sihanaka and Antamoro by 1800 and the Betsileo in 1810, dying soon after. His son Radama I, the Great, would continue his work. The end of the French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars didn't mean the end of Britain trying to undermine France at every turn, and Madagascar became another battleground for empire. The island was right on the route to India, Britain's most important possession, and they were keen on having an ally in the region. They gave Radama guns and sent officers to train his army in European tactics. The British recognized him king of Madagascar, and he conquered the Antamboaka and Bezanozano, and the kingdom of Betsimisaraka in 1817, the Antanosi in 1825, and the Antafasi and Antasaka in 1827. He died young in 1828, but he left Imerina the most powerful kingdom in Madagascar. He was succeeded by his wife, Ranovaluna I. She benefited from tides of change in the region. See, slavery was on its way out in Europe. Britain abolished slavery in 1834 and France in 1848. Britain also used its unchallenged naval might to stop slave ships, and soon the main source of revenue for much of Madagascar evaporated. But Imerina had secured a subsidy from Britain to compensate for the loss of their slave money. Madagascar was now stuck mainly exporting livestock to the plantation colonies of the Indian Ocean. Imerina could now take advantage of the Sakalava kingdom's disarray. 1834, Imerina conquers the southern part of Runabe around the Mangoki River, and finally Boina in 1840. Probably desperate for aid, the last ruler of Boina, Queen Tsiyomeku, sells the island of Nosy Bay to France. It came to naught, though, but did introduce the French again to the island. Queen Ranavaluna I's brutal wars and repressions claimed perhaps over 1 million Malagasy, but Imerina mellowed out after her death in 1861 and opened up to the outer world. 1869, Queen Ranavaluna II makes Anglican Christianity the official religion of Madagascar, but trouble was on the horizon. 1861, a French adventurer, Joseph-François Lambert, secured a business charter from Imerina in exchange for a tithe to the crown. He founded the Madagascar Company, but as the monarchy became increasingly pro-British, the company's fortunes soured. Eventually, their assets were confiscated, and the French government's indignation prompted the declaration of a formal Malagasy protectorate in 1882, using an agreement with Antankarana as their inn. To secure this new colony, the first French Houva or Malagasy War began in 1883, near the beginning of the scramble for Africa. During the Berlin Conference, France had secured the island in its sphere of influence. No longer able to count on British support, Imerina's days were numbered. The war concluded in 1885. Imerina accepted French protection. With Madagascar actually occupied as per the rules of the conference, Britain and France squared away their spheres. The 1869 opening of the Suez Canal made the island less useful to Britain, and she bargained Madagascar away in exchange for Zanzibar. Queen Ranavaluna III was alone when she refused to let the French exercise their purported protection in 1894. The Second French Houva War ended in 1896, France annexing the island entirely in 1897, bringing the Tsimihety and Bara along for the ride. The Queen was exiled to La Réunion. Madagascar was now a French colony, its capital at Antananarivo, or Tana, to its friends. The French added a few uninhabited islands in the Mozambique Channel to their new colony and sent administrators to let everyone know they were now under French rule. This didn't go over as smoothly in some places. In 1900, the French conquer what's left of Manabe, and in 1903 they subjugate the Antandroy. Island-wide revolts in 1904 were only put down the next year after much destruction. Only in 1907 did the Mahafali surrender. In 1912, France merges its neighboring colony of Mayotte and dependencies into Madagascar, becoming the Colony of Madagascar and Dependencies, Colonie de Madagascar et Dépendance. French holdings in the southern Indian Ocean and Antarctica were added just for convenience. While British rule in Africa tended to be pretty hands-off, French colonial rule was not. The French did outlaw slavery on the island, but tried to impose French Catholicism, French language, French law, and French culture. And of course, French firms took advantage of cheap and even forced labor to extract resources like hardwoods and plantations. The wallop France suffered in the Second World War guaranteed that something was going to change. The 1944 Brazzaville Conference was held to reach a compromise, reform for the colonies that defected from the German-controlled Vichy regime to Charles de Gaulle's Free France. French colonials were promised social, political, and economic reforms, granted equal rights and limited self-rule. But ultimately, the empire was to remain intact. The 1946 French Constitution officially renamed all French colonies as overseas territories, territoires d'outre-mer, in a rebranded French Union. The Comoros were detached from Madagascar as a separate territory, while La Réunion, got upgraded to department. The small uninhabited island of Tromelin was assigned to Madagascar. Despite these promises and changes, things continued business as usual in French Madagascar. 1947 saw a widespread revolt across the island after the French government refused to entertain talks of increased reforms. The revolt was brutally suppressed, with tens of thousands of Malagasy killed in what would be considered French crimes against humanity. Hard to blame the Malagasy at this point. 1956, facing turmoil across its empire and international pressure, France granted universal suffrage to Madagascar. Two major parties emerged: the Social Democrats, who advocated for self-rule under France, and the Congress Party for Independence, which supported independence. Seeing which way the wind was blowing, France detached its southern and Antarctic lands from Madagascar for safekeeping. Good thing, too, for in 1958 the Fourth French Republic was overthrown in de Gaulle's coup, and soon its colonies would be dropped like bad habits. The French Union was renamed the French Community, and Madagascar became the autonomous Malagasy Republic, République Malgache, with the Social Democrats in charge. The Malagasy language was made co-official with French, even with France revoking the surrounding uninhabited islands in 1960, useful as bases in the Indian Ocean. President Tsiranana negotiated the final step to independence that same year, while maintaining relations with France. His opposition, however, disapproved of his pro-Western stances. Amid attempts to consolidate power, Tsiranana's situation unraveled in the 60s, with riots, revolts, and economic downturns. This was all compounded by ethnic tensions between the Marina elite and coastal Malagasy, the Côtiers. 1972, the government was given over to the army as a military dictatorship. Perhaps in a bid to distract from domestic issues, they began claiming the small scattered islands around Madagascar as rightful territory, not recognizing their reassignment. But it couldn't stabilize the country. Finally, Didier Ratsiraka was chosen as president in 1975. Ratsiraka soon renamed the country to the Democratic Republic of Madagascar and started a socialist revolution, similarly to Mozambique just across the channel. Nationalization and non-aligned foreign policy were the two cornerstones of Ratsiraka's regime. Despite his efforts, Madagascar did not improve, and Ratsiraka's popularity declined in the 80s. With the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1989, one-party rule was now untenable. 1991, and opposition groups forced the government to accept democratic reforms, and the next year a new constitution was adopted, creating La République de Madagascar, ni Republicani Madagascar, the Republic of Madagascar. The new liberal republic still couldn't get it right, continuing with economic woes and political instability. Ratsiraka's successor, Alberi Zafi, was impeached, and then Ratsiraka came back again. Things looked up in the 2000s with foreign investment and tourism, until a 2009 coup. 2010, a new constitution was adopted. Subsequent elections have been rocky, with allegations of fraud. Today, Madagascar remains very poor, with severe wealth inequalities, especially between the Marina elite and the Côtiers. In 2021, she experienced a famine following drought in the south. The country is mainly agrarian, Malagasy farming as they have for over 1,000 years. Unfortunately, explosive population growth has led to demand for land, and large swaths of forest have been burned for farmland and clear-cut for export. This harvesting continues even in protected areas, and personally, I hope Madagascar can work to preserve its natural environment. This island is such a unique place, unlike any on Earth, and it'd be such a shame to have it destroyed. That, though, is a problem ultimately only the Malagasy people can solve. You know, while we're in the area, why don't we visit the islands in the Western Indian Ocean? Next time, we'll hop to the channel to the Comoros. See you there.